Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Robert. I'm one of the pastors here. If you are a guest, very glad to have you. And if you're a regular part, you're okay too. We're glad you're here. I want to do several things this evening. Mostly, I just want to remind us of things that are probably familiar to many, if not all of us, and slow us down a little bit, because sometimes familiarity can strip things of their significance and power. They just become commonplace. And that's a beautiful thing when something like the gospel is commonplace, in that it means it's just pervasive and we count on it and we hear it and we understand it. But at another level, it's very, very important that we slow it down and let it impact us afresh. And I want to start by reading one verse, and then we'll get into several others. But in 1 Peter, it says this: "He himself bore our sins in his body on the tree, that we might die to sin and live to righteousness. By his wounds you have been healed." The tree it's talking about is the cross, of course. And as I think about this verse, and as I've thought about the story that underlies all of Good Friday and everything we're here about, it has struck me this week that actually the story can be understood by thinking our way through three pairs of things. There are three triplets of things, I guess. There's three gardens where the story unfolds. And there are three trees that anchor the story, and there are three deaths that are the centerpiece of the story. Right? We have the initial reality that kind of underlies everything is the Garden of Eden. That's the first garden. And then Good Friday happens actually bookended by two gardens. It starts more or less with Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, praying and wrestling. And it ends with Jesus buried in a tomb that is in a garden, right? You remember when Mary Magdalene saw Jesus on that first Easter but didn't yet recognize him, she mistook him for the gardener. So there's this garden setting, and between that is when the crucifixion and the trials and all those things unfold. And it's interesting to me, and I think it's helpful in some way with the themes, to remember those three gardens, because there's different things that happen, and it kind of ties the story together. There are three trees. In the Garden of Eden, there are lots of trees there, but there are two of particular note. There's one tree that is a tree that involves an invitation, and another tree that is a boundary. And it's because they don't take the invitation, but they cross the boundary, that they actually lose the invitation and lose everything else. That's the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, which is why we wind up in 1 Peter 2:24 with Jesus hanging on a tree, which is the tree of rescue. It's the tree of solution. It's what fixes the problem that's introduced. And then there's death that underpins the story. There's the death of Adam and Eve, who, when they sin, die. And then there's the death of Jesus, that he offers his life to be a rescue for us, to make atonement, to make us right with God. So this evening, we want to kind of look at those themes, and we want to reread some of the familiar verses in the Gospel of Mark, actually, about Good Friday, and let ourselves kind of sit with the reality of what Good Friday is, and be impacted by that afresh. Right? When God created everything, he created humanity as the pinnacle of his creation. We were made in his image, and we were placed in a garden that God had planted in a wild world. It was a good world, but it was a wild world, and he put us in the world to make it better. Not that we would improve on something that God did that was deficient. That's crazy. But that we would take something he designed and, according to his plan, develop it even more. And so he gives these commands to Adam and Eve: be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth, and then rule over it and subdue it. He gives them those commands to shape their future. They're made in his image and intended to live in partnership, in relationship with him. First thing he does is bless them. And the picture that we have in the Garden of Eden is one that is captured in the word shalom, peace, Only when we think of shalom, when we think of peace anyway, it's a pretty anemic term compared to how God looks at it. We tend to think of it in terms of just not open conflict. And that's good because there's so much open conflict. It'd be nice if we didn't have that. But when God talks about peace, that's included, of course, but there's so much more. It's vibrancy, it is thriving, it is health, it is relational interwebbing in a good way. It is meaning, it is significance, it is life as it is intended to be. And in the Garden of Eden, especially the way chapter 2 ends, which is before sin enters the world, he writes it in such a way to make it really clear that Adam and Eve are living in shalom. Everything is as it should be. They're in right relationship with each other. They're in right relationship with God. They're in right relationship with themselves. Nothing is off. Nothing is broken. Nothing is wrong. In the middle of the garden, he puts two trees, one which he intends for our use and one which he intends for a boundary. Right? The one he intends for our use is the tree of life. We are intended to live forever in dynamic relationship with God. That's to be an enduring and beautiful thing. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil is the boundary because it's not simply understanding. It's not like if you eat the fruit from this tree, a file opens up in your head and lights go on. It's like, oh, that's right, that's right, that's right, that's wrong, that's wrong, that's right. That's not what it's talking about. It's talking about, I should say, it's talking about that, but a whole lot more because it includes decision, right? It's not just that I would understand things as they are, but that I would establish what should be, that I would make the decisions myself. I determine what is right. I determine what is wrong. I determine what matters. I determine what's meaningful for me. I determine direction. I determine purpose. In other words, I am God. What I've done when I do that is I have tried to take over his role. He gets to decide what matters and doesn't matter and what things are all about and what's right and wrong. So when Adam and Eve reach for that fruit, they're not simply getting some fresh understanding. It's an act of rebellion. It is literally cosmic treason where they are saying, in effect, God, you are dead to me. I don't need you. I will do this my way. Which is not only disastrous because they're not equipped to do what it is they're trying to do, and it opens the door for all kinds of havoc to be unleashed, it's actually treasonous. And so not only are they no longer in shalom and in harmony, but they're actually under condemnation as rebels. Because you can't seek to overthrow the government of the universe with impunity. God is actually just. He will actually do what's right. And treason is a capital offense. And so Adam and Eve die. God tells them, if you eat of the fruit of this tree, in that day you will die. And that's exactly what happens, and it happens in two ways. One, there's something about them that immediately shrivels and dies. Right? We would call that their spiritual life, their soul, whatever you want to call it. There's parts of me that are not material, and those continue to live, but there's parts of me that are intended to relate and connect with God, and that's just gone. That's dead. And then I physically die. That's what they did. They physically died in that moment. They just didn't know it. There's a strange thing that we do around Valentine's and anniversaries and stuff. I occasionally will give my wife flowers, right? I love you. This is to represent my love for you. Here are these dead plants. And she's like, oh, that's so wonderful. Well, that's not her voice. But anyway, that's wonderful. That's so nice. And why does that make sense? Because they are dead plants. They've been cut off from the bush and they are dead. They just haven't figured that out yet. So they're still beautiful and fragrant. Give them a little time. Right, so in the moment I give them to her, it still looks right. But if I gave it to her a week later, she would go, what is this all about? Adam and Eve had that same experience. They were cut off from life. They died immediately. It just took a while to work its way out. So the condemnation and the catastrophe came in that first garden. And those two people died because they chose the wrong tree. And in reaching for the tree of the knowledge of good and evil and asserting themselves, not only did they destroy things, they lost their access to what they were supposed to have, eternal life. Which is why when we come down to 1 Peter 2, Jesus offers his life, because that treason is a capital offense, and an execution must take place for the sake of justice. Which means everyone who sinned stands under God's condemnation and must be executed as a treasonous rebel, or someone else stands in their place. And that's what Jesus did. That's why it says that he died so that we may live. And it's by his wounds that we are healed. And those two trees that set up the whole dynamic of life in this world are answered in a third tree, the cross, where Jesus lays down his life. And that first garden where everything unraveled, the problems and challenges and obstacles and failings and disasters and sins that were kind of birthed there are addressed on Good Friday. And it takes place between two gardens. There's the Garden of Gethsemane, where Jesus is in anguish praying, and there's the garden where the tomb is, when everything is finally seemingly come to a conclusion and he's gone, he's dead. And that's where we want to spend our time tonight, is in that day between those two gardens. We call today Good Friday, and I know a lot of you have probably thought about that, because it's like, why would we call this good? If you never have, well, here's your chance. This is kind of crazy to call today a good day, because today is actually a day when we commemorate a terrible miscarriage of justice and brutality that's staggering. In fact, sometimes when we want to share something and give it real emphasis, we'll use kind of inflated language. This has cosmic significance. This is the most disastrous thing that ever happened, right? And we understand. When we're talking and we're telling stories and we're trying to make a point, we will sometimes exaggerate to get the point across. Only in this story, there's no exaggeration. This is cosmically significant. This is the single darkest moment in all of human history. This is the single greatest miscarriage of justice in all of human history. This is the greatest catastrophe. And yet, it's also the greatest good, which is why we call it Good Friday, though on the surface that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Everywhere we go in our culture, there's crosses, right? We have a big cross right here behind me on the stage. We got that a number of years ago, had a connection with somebody in the Northwest who had big property, lots of trees, and liked to make stuff. And we said, could you make us a cross, and could you make it more or less life-size? And so he did. He cut down the tree on his property, and he shaped it, and he told us afterwards, I did all of it by hand. It took a very long time. And it was a whole lot of work, and it was a whole lot harder. You'll notice it's pegged, it's not nailed or bolted. It's all hand done. The reason he did that, he said, I want it to be as authentic as I could make it. And as I did it, it was an act of worship. It was this joyous season of worship. And that sounds beautiful until you think, but it's a cross. It's an instrument of execution. When Jesus was crucified, he was hung up there naked and tortured to death. The horrors of what he experienced are things that we skirt around typically or blunt when we're preaching sermons, when we're singing songs, when we're writing stories, doing movies. Every once in a while, someone will take off the gloves, as it were, and it's staggering to think about it. And here is this guy who makes this for us, and he does it as an act of worship, and it's like, wow, there's a real disconnect there on the surface. I collect crosses, and I collect them from all over the world, from places that I've been, ministry trips and so on, and I have crosses from Latin America, I have them from Europe, I have them from Africa, I have them from Asia, I have them from Pacific Islands, I have them from countries that are steeped in Christian traditions. I also have them from countries that are very secular, from Hindu countries, from Buddhist countries, from Muslim countries. I even have one from Pakistan, which is one of the most monolithically Muslim countries in the world and one of the most anti-Christian countries in the world. And I was there in a shop and I looked and there it was, a cross right there for me to buy because it is that pervasive. It's everywhere you look. And the crosses that I have are all different forms. That one's made out of salt. This one's made out of wood. Some of them are made out of metal. Some of them made out of stone. Some of them have jewels put on them like garnets and stuff. There's old ones and there's modern ones. There's big ones. There's small ones. They come from all different cultures and all different levels of craftsmanship have gone into them. It's just everywhere. The cross is everywhere, which is kind of crazy to think about. We would put that much attention on it when we understand what the cross actually is. I was in a Japanese restaurant this week, and the waitress came up to our table, and she was wearing a cross. Now, I didn't talk to her about it. It wasn't appropriate at that moment, so I don't know what it meant, but it's a Japanese restaurant. She's Asian. I assume she may have been Japanese, and it's a culture that's very not Christian, and she's wearing a cross. Maybe that's a testimony of her own personal faith, or maybe living here in the States, it's just an adornment that is a beautiful thing, but it's crazy to even think that a cross could be an adornment and a beautiful thing because it's so ugly. And yet the cross is the answer. It is the solution for literally, again, no exaggeration, literally everything. Everything that's gone wrong. From canker sores to conflicts to cancer, everything. It is the solution to all of the darkness and the failings, the broken homes, the selfish lives. Now, it's not the total solution. That would be naive to say. But it is the central solution and the necessary solution from which everything else has to flow. Because without it, without what God did on the cross, it really doesn't much matter. I mean, it's better if I live 90 years and I continually seek to get more virtuous and kind and do better things. That's certainly better than living 90 years and getting as bad and as grumpy and as irritating and as evil as I can. But against the backdrop of time, it's really not that big, is it? And the bottom line is I will never be able to do what it is that I would want to do. I will always fail. I will always come up short. My best efforts will always in the end crumble. I know that. And if you're attentive and have lived any period of time, you know that's true too. We can have all the best intentions, but it will never quite get where it's supposed to get. That's because what happened in the Garden of Eden took all that God was doing that was so good, and it tried to wrap it around us. And it never works. And the alienation that we have from God and the rebellion in our hearts can't be addressed by just changing a few behaviors. And at the end of the day, something has to make us right. And that's where the cross comes in. Because the cross makes a powerful statement about God. It says that God absolutely cares. He absolutely cares about truth and justice and right. And he will not compromise them. He will not water them down. He will not blunt them. He will give them full expression. And at the very same time, it says that God absolutely cares about me. And he will not abandon me, even to the consequences of my own sinful foolishness. And in God's incredible work on the cross, he brings those two things together. The cross is the intersection between God's uncompromisable holiness and God's incomprehensible grace. He brings those two things together. So even though what happened is ugly. It's ugly beyond really our imagining. It also is actually Good Friday. Though it's the worst Friday, it's the best Friday. We've been celebrating this day for 1,996 consecutive years. 93 consecutive years, almost certainly. There's two dates that actually could work, and the one that I think makes a whole lot more sense is actually today, April 3rd, 33 AD. And if that's the date, there have been 1,993 celebrations reminding us that the worst day that ever happened was also the greatest day that ever happened, and that's why we call it Good Friday. Reminding us that though the cross is ugly, it is beautiful because of what it has done. If you have a Bible, would you open to the book of Mark, please? And I just want to remind us of a few verses, probably familiar verses, but I just want to slow it down enough for us to remember, kind of sit with that for a minute, and then seek to respond to God in that. We won't read the whole story. But we'll start in chapter 14, verse 32. It's talking about the disciples. They've just had this full evening, big meal, which becomes the Lord's Supper. There's foot washing, there's teaching. They've had to hike from the probably southwest corner of the city all the way across the city, down the Kidron Valley and up partway onto the shoulder of the Mount of Olives, where there's an olive grove and a garden. And that's where we pick it up. Verse 32, they went to a place called Gethsemane. And he said to his disciples, "Sit here while I pray." And he took with him Peter and James and John and began to be greatly distressed and troubled. And he said to them, "My soul is very sorrowful, even to death. Remain here and watch." It was stressful. Jesus' will never wavered. He always was completely in with what the Father had ordained and what he himself had ordained. But this was really hard, and it took a little time for the rest of him to catch up with that place. And he goes and he struggles and he wrestles, and in fact, we're told that it's like he's sweating drops of blood. It's so intense. Going a little farther, he fell down on the ground and prayed, if it were possible, the hour might pass from him. And he said, "Abba, Father, all things are possible for you. Remove this cup from me." He's picking up an Old Testament image, the cup of God's wrath that's about to be poured out. He knows what's going to happen. He knows the physical trauma that is going to come through the crucifixion, and he knows the greater trauma of judgment and condemnation and whatever. We don't understand exactly how that worked, but we are told very explicitly in Corinthians, in 2 Corinthians 5, he, the Father, made him, the Son, to be sin on our behalf, that we might be made the righteousness of God in him. Something extraordinary happens, and that's so hard. "Remove this cup from me, yet not what I will, but what you will." And he came and found them sleeping. And he said to Peter, "Simon, are you asleep? Could you not watch 1 hour? Watch and pray that you may not enter into temptation. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak." Right? By this point, they've had that full evening, and they go out late into the night, and that's when the prayer meeting starts. And Jesus is the only one praying. They're supposed to kind of be moral support and silently pray, but it's after midnight, certainly, by the time much of this happens. There's this extended season of prayer. Their eyes are gritty with tiredness. Their minds are foggy with exhaustion, and they simply cannot keep their eyes open. Their eyes are heavy also because their hearts are heavy. Another gospel makes it clear that they're so exhausted because they're so sorrowful. They know things are not good. They know things are not right. They don't understand it all. But it's a heavy moment, and they just succumb. They can't even stay awake, which is very hurtful to Jesus. Watch and pray that you may not enter into temptation. Verse 38. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak. And again he went away and prayed, saying the same words. And again he came and found them sleeping, for their eyes were very heavy. They did not know what to answer him. That must have been horrible. Here they had promised to die for him, and they loved him. They truly did. And yet they are wrung out. They are bone weary, and they are very alone. And they just can't sustain it. He came a third time. Are you still sleeping and taking your rest? It is enough. The hour has come. The Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us be going. My betrayer is at hand. Then he goes on and he recounts how Judas came with a whole detachment of soldiers. And he tells them beforehand, you'll know which one Jesus is because I'm going to give him the kiss of greeting. And he goes up and he kisses the Judas kiss, right? That's when it happened. And then Jesus is taken by force to stand trial, only it's a ridiculous, illegal set of trials. And then because the national leaders do not have authority to inflict capital punishment, they take him to the governor, who does. And we'll pick it up there. Chapter 15, verse 15. There's been some back and forth. Pilate, the governor, actually wants to release Jesus, but it's all going sideways. And so it says in verse 15, so Pilate, wishing to satisfy the crowd, released for them Barabbas, and having scourged Jesus, he delivered him to be crucified. That little phrase sounds so innocuous. A scourging would sometimes result in the loss of life. It was a brutal form of torture, really. And so Jesus is exhausted, he's alone, he's been tortured repeatedly in different ways, and then he's handed over to be crucified. First, he's handed over to the Roman soldiers who take him and mock him and abuse him in a variety of ways. They beat him in other ways. Then he carries his cross only part way because he no longer has the strength to do that, so they conscript somebody else to carry it, and they take him out. And we'll pick up the story again in verse 22. They brought him to the place called Golgotha, which means place of the skull, and they offered him wine mixed with myrrh, but he did not take it. And they crucified him, divided his garments among them, casting lots for them to decide which each would take. And it was the third hour when they crucified him. And the inscription of the charge against him read, that would be over his head, the King of the Jews. And with him they crucified two robbers, one on his right and one on his left. And those who passed by derided him, wagging their heads and saying, you who would destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days, save yourself and come down from the cross. So also the chief priest, the priest's entire job was to bring the people and God together, was to represent the people to God and offer their sacrifices and prayers, and then to bring the blessing of God. He was that channel through which that was supposed to happen. That's who these people are, who are actually mocking and crucifying Jesus, who is God. He's God. This is catastrophic. Keep reading. Verse 31. The chief priests with the scribes, that's the religious scholars, mocked him to one another, saying, he saved others, he cannot save himself. Let the Christ, the King of Israel, come down now from the cross, that we may believe. Those who were crucified with him also reviled him. And when the 6th hour had come, there was darkness over the whole land until the 9th hour. And at the 9th hour, Jesus cried with a loud voice, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you forsaken me? It's quoting from the Psalms. This is a moment of total desolation. Some of the bystanders hearing it said, behold, he's calling for Elijah. They thought that's what Eloi was, and that wasn't. Someone ran and filled a sponge with sour wine and put it on a reed and gave it to him to drink, saying, wait, let's see whether Elijah will come and take him down. And Jesus uttered a loud cry and breathed his last, and the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. And then it describes some of the response. There's a Roman soldier who's amazed. But then at the end of the day, verse 42, when evening had come, since it was the day of preparation, that is the day before the Sabbath, Joseph of Arimathea, a respected member of the council, who was also himself looking for the kingdom of God, took courage, went to Pilate, and asked for the body of Jesus. Pilate was surprised to hear that he'd already died. Summoning the centurion, he asked him whether he was already dead, and when he learned from the centurion that he was, he granted the corpse to Joseph, and Joseph brought a linen shroud, and taking him down, wrapped him in the linen shroud and laid him in a tomb that had been cut out of the rock. And he rolled a stone against the entrance of the tomb, and Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of Joseph, saw where he was laid. So we started in the Garden of Gethsemane with Jesus wrestling in prayer, but agreeing to do what was planned from eternity past. And we end here in a garden by the tomb where his dead body, his corpse, is put into the ground and it's covered up. And the last words we hear are actually pretty sad. There's these two women who were part of his team who had followed him and encouraged him and served him in a variety of ways. And everything that they thought was going to happen has been dashed. He's in the grave, dead. And that's the last thing we see is they watch as they close the grave. And if the story just stopped there, it would be the most tragic and saddest story of all time. There are still elements of that. But there's this redemptive side, because it's not just a moment of desolation that happens on the cross where he says, my God, why have you forsaken me? It's not long after that there's a cry of victory when he says, it is finished. It stands completed, the work of God that was necessary to make right what has been wrong and to rescue those who have been lost and to reverse what happened in the garden. It's finished, and it is forever finished. It will never be undone. And that reality was vindicated on Easter Sunday when he rose from the dead. And we will celebrate that joyfully on Sunday. But tonight we're trying to sit in the crucifixion story. And I think it's good to just remember how sad this is. I remember sharing one time with a woman who had never heard the gospel, never even heard of Jesus at all. And as I was telling the story, it was just obvious that she was falling in love with him. That her eyes just reflected, it just glowed, they radiated. It was such a joyful thing. When I got to this part of the story, they welled up with tears, and she just broke down. She didn't know what was coming next, and she just couldn't imagine that anyone would do this to Jesus. How could that happen? Well, even though we know what's coming next, the impact of that still needs to sit with us because it helps us understand what God has done. As I think about this story unfolding in these gardens, as I think about the Garden of Gethsemane, what happens there? What does that show me? Jesus is wrestling. He's obviously deeply troubled, and yet he's unwavering in his commitment, and he follows through on God's eternal plan, his eternal plan. Why? Because of love. The Garden of Gethsemane is this statement of God's love. God so loved the world that he gave his son, that whoever believes in him would not perish but have eternal life. That's why. In fact, it predates his coming to earth by eternity. Ephesians 1 says, from eternity past, he predestined us for adoption, and he did that in love. And in Gethsemane, we see that we have a God who loves us enough to follow through on something that is horrifying. And in the tomb garden, we see that he will make the ultimate sacrifice. We have a God who loves us and will sacrifice himself for us. That's a staggering thought. And that has to happen because of what happened in the garden. When we, our ancestors, but it's all passed to all of us, actually said, we don't need you, God. We'll do our own thing. Oh, you do need me. And I'm not that easily put out. But how we respond is really what we want to talk about for our last moment or two. God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, that whoever believes in him would not perish but have eternal life. Verse 17 says, God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but that the world through him would be saved. Good news so far. Other shoe drops in verse 18. The one who does not believe already stands condemned because they don't believe. Jesus didn't have to come into the world to condemn us because we already are condemned. We're just waiting the execution of sentence. And he said, but here's the solution. I'll take the sentence for you. You just need to accept me for who I am. Which is me saying, you know what? I opt out of the Adam and Eve option. They said, I want to be God. I'm going to figure it out. I don't want to be that. I can't figure it out. You're God. Help. I'm reading a book that the way it talked about Genesis 3 was pretty arresting to me. And I don't remember all of how he said it, but basically it's like this. After the sin happens, and God shows up in the garden, right? He comes in the evening, which apparently he's done on a regular basis. They would meet with him in the evening, and he shows up this one evening, and they've sinned. And now everything's ruined. Now they're at odds with themselves. They're at odds with each other. They're at odds with God. And when God starts calling out, what do? They run and hide. And we have been running and hiding from God ever since. And we run and hide in all different kinds of ways. Some of us may take kind of a high-handed way of, I really don't need you. When I chose the fruit, I meant it. I'll be my own God. I'll set my own course. It's not going to work. And I will stand before him one day. I cannot keep my distance from God. I will either be embraced as a beloved child, or I will be condemned as a rebel. But either way, he gets the last word. Some of us maybe run and hide with more of a kind of a moral picture. It's like, okay, wait, this is a mess. Okay, I got to figure this out. I'll be with you in a minute, God. And we get over here and we try to fix our lives. We try to do the right thing. We try to get better. I'm going to do more good things than bad things. I'm going to be a moral person. I'm going to be a good mom. I'm going to be a great boss. You fill in the blanks. We try all those things. Those are valuable enough in their own way, but they don't get us right with God. They don't fix the problem. It's just one other way of me running from God, saying, I'm not ready to face you. I'll try to figure it out. I still determine. And what struck me in the book I was reading, he said, why didn't they just say, thank God he's here. He will know what to do, and run for him? And why don't we do that? I'm a mess. I don't know. Yes, you could wipe me out right now. I know I can't fix it. I just come to you for your grace. Why didn't Adam and Eve do that? I don't know. I mean, that's the way we all naturally respond. But on a night like tonight, when we get to focus on the whole story of the cross, it's like this isn't just a dark moment. It's also a brilliant light that says God has done for me what I could never do. And so the question is, as I sit with the reality of the cross and of Good Friday, am I turning away from God? Am I running from God? Am I keeping my distance? Or am I embracing him and am I accepting him as who he is? There's a foundational way. For some of us, maybe we don't have any relationship with God. And if you're like, I don't know if I do or not, you don't. Because you know. You know, I know God and God knows me. Otherwise, you're somewhere else on a journey, but you're apart from him. And the point would be that you would just say, I'm not going to run anymore. Help. I surrender. You get to be God. I don't have any claim. I'm a mess. But I believe you love me, so here I am. But I think even as followers of Christ, we need to keep coming back to this reality. One of the things that I've learned and am learning, I've been following Jesus for decades, and I'm pretty serious about it. And I've grown a lot. I know that I'm not nearly as sinful as I was 30 years ago, 40 years ago. You know what's weird, though? is I actually have a deeper, I am so far from you, God. I had no idea I was this far away. I had no idea I was this weak and this small and this messed up. And the gospel is something I still need. I still need to understand that God has chosen me and he loves me, period. I have a responsibility, of course, to respond and to do the spiritual disciplines and steward the grace that I'm given, but my life never consists of my merit or of my effort. It is always based on God's Spirit and his grace. And the cross is a reminder. It's an extraordinary thing that God did because I have an extraordinary need. And I still serve a God all these years later who is a God who just loves me and who wants to pursue me, and he wants to be the one to make me right. And the primary thing I need to do each day is say, here I am. I'm not going to run away. I'm going to run towards you. So here's the question. Which way are your feet pointed? We're going to transition to several things right now. I'm going to ask the prayer team to come up here. Nate and Alice can come back up. And we're actually going to have the ushers come too, because if you came prepared for an offering, you want to worship in that way, you're encouraged to do that as God would lead you. But I want to give you a chance to really kind of take it to another level. All right, the prayer team's going to be here as we sing these songs. And if God's doing something in your heart, let that come to fruition. Let these people pray with you, encourage you, support you. Maybe you have questions about your relationship with God in the first place. Let them lead you and answer questions. They'd love to do that. Maybe you came into the room with some other burden and has nothing to do with what we've been talking about. That's okay too. We'd love to have you just have a chance to be prayed for and encouraged. We're going to sing some songs, and we want to do that as an act of worship. Lord, I just pray that you would turn our hearts towards you, that our feet would be towards you, that we wouldn't be those who are running away, but that we would see our situation and say, thank God you're here. You know what to do. Please help. Whatever that looks like for each of us, Lord, that's what we ask for in this moment. In Jesus' name, amen.